In this world, there are plenty of YouTube videos, but really only two types of YouTubers. The relevant and the not. When it comes to the former, like blue cheese and mozzarella, you can be relevant for bad or good reasons. And IGN, well, they're definitely not yellow, I'll tell you that. But when it comes to the latter, what about someone like me? Someone who very few know, but wants his YouTube channel to take off. Is defending the punching bag that is IGN against internet Jesus no less. Not gonna turn me into Swiss cheese. Is it really the right step for an unknown face? Internet points wise, probably not.
Boo!
But it's what my heart tells me is right. Not because I want to be contrarian or suck up to IGN, but because in this video, I saw a human being being fair and unjust to another human being. This is Detective Wood Controller on the case of IGN versus Penguin Z0. Cheese to meet you, and let's get into the meat and potatoes.
Now first up, I don't hate Charlie and my plan isn't to rain down ass chocolate on him or his factory of Willy Wankers. I used to be one of those guys who thought penguins, just kept repeating the same childish jokes again and again and that the content was no good. But honestly, those jokes make me laugh. I watch a lot of his videos and I'm entertained by them, so I do like him. And there are going to be points in this crisscross examination sauce where I agree with him, but none of us are perfect. And in his video, might be the worst review I've ever seen, he does some of the worst mental gymnastics I've ever seen, and somehow misunderstands very valid criticisms. It's not just him though, these points are being echoed by many, and the crime scene is a mess. This is gonna take a lot of work, but let's start with a short summary about both the game and Charlie's gripes with the IGN review. Mouse PI for Hire is a boomer shooter. Think Doom, meaning it's very arcadey, not about taking cover and picking off enemies. You don't even have iron sights and enemies move very fast in Mouse PI. It's all about running around, keeping your position in mind while dealing with waves of baddies. In the story, you play as Jack Pepper, a hard-boiled detective who served in a big war where he was disillusioned about the world and is currently trying to make sure at least some justice prevails. You start off at the end of the story, chasing someone on a huge aircraft, and then flash back to a few weeks ago, where you're investigating the disappearance of a magician. While wondering how you got from one situation to the other, connecting all the dots, you'll run into some old friends, systemic oppression, corrupt authorities, all the things you'd expect from a noir thriller. However, most of Mouse PI's presentation is silly.
Alright, sure, why not? Certainly trusted worse advice.
As you can see from the graphics, the game is set in a cartoon world and the dialogue is very self-aware, constantly making references to the fact that we're playing a game, that the society is made of mice, callbacks to other cartoons and games and movies. And an excess of all of that was a major complaint in the IGN review. And making that complaint was a major complaint for Charlie. And he argues about the game being a cartoon and so we shouldn't take it seriously. However, I think the original reviewer's points, Will Borger is his name, aren't presented as they were really intended. Getting into the crunch of the cheese ball, Charlie's video about IGN's review overall has the stink of moldy cock. And he pisses all over Will's points with that cock even when they make sense. He gives some concessions, but I believe his bias against IGN speaks louder than his love of Mouse PI in his opinion piece. And like I said, a lot of people harbor similar sentiments. So I know that siding with the multi-million-dollar company is not gonna be looked upon favorably, but listen here, you little shoo. You're in my channel now, and I'm always right here, and everyone always agrees with me, and I've never received a bad comment. If you don't want to disappear in the night, let's get the cheese ball rolling, and go through Charlie's points one by one. Now we can see a mix of concession and bias right at the start of the video, because Penguin Z0 says that the score of 6 out of 10 by itself is not really boiling mac and cheese poured in his backside crease, but that the reasons for the score are dumb as ass. But he can't help putting a little barb at the score anyway.
The IGN grading scale is so fucking cattywampus it defies conventional wisdom and is an affront to God in and of itself. So it's not even the score that's bothersome.
This doesn't have much to do with Mouse PI itself, but he's already kind of degrading IGN in the viewers' eyes, right? I mean, as much as it is possible to degrade IGN any further than people's existing preconceptions of them, but anyway, I did take a dark psychology course on Reddit, so I'm very smart, and this is a classic trick called poisoning the rat in the well, where you preemptively discredit someone before even letting the argument squeak for themselves. But that is the least of my worries, because at around the 3-minute mark, Charlie really misses the mark at presenting Will's argument. He starts out giving the benefit of the doubt.
So basically, he doesn't like that they mention cheese a lot. He doesn't like that it's constantly referencing the fact that they're mice, or that it's a video game, or other cartoons, thinks it's too referential, which I actually think is a valid complaint.
But ends up kind of backpedaling on it.
He does mention the cheese a lot, which I think is weird because I think it's a fine complaint to say, like, I started to get annoyed with all this cheese stuff. But it makes sense in the world because these are fucking mice. So of course cheese is going to be a big part of, like, that society in the world they have built.
Will's complaint wasn't that cheese references don't make sense in the universe of Mouse PI, but that the constant references get in the way of immersing yourself in that universe. Because
Nothing in Mouseburg is allowed to just be.
the story and characters and world of the game, the non-surface level parts with emotional beats and social messaging, are undercut by the constant need to break the fourth wall. We'll get into it in more detail as Charlie gets into Will's review getting into it in more detail. But there is another point in this segment that Charlie makes that makes me wanna just grab him and hold him against the wall and tell him that
This isn't right.
The writing isn't going to hit for everybody. There's nothing wrong with that. But as the review goes on, the complaint becomes more, it wasn't noir the way I wanted it to be. It wasn't serious enough. And then starts picking out logical inconsistencies with this world. And that's where things get real fucking goofy. Like, that's turbo wacko sauce right there.
this isn't right. That's not what Will said about Mouse PI for Hire. I mean, Moist CR's entire complaint here is centered on the game not being as serious and noir as Will wanted it to be. But that's kind of a half picture. Will does start making comparisons to other serious noir media, and that part I do think is unfair, and I'll get to it. But his complaint for this portion of the game was that the story was brought down by the sillier aspects of the game, the constant references and referential jokes. Because, as the review points out later, the game itself does want us to care about the story, and I agree with that. Charlie doesn't outright say that the game doesn't care about its own story, but some of his wording might make you feel that way.
This game is a love letter to the old rubber hose cartoons and noir. It is not meant to be like a serious fucking pipe smoking noir experience that's gonna have you sitting there thinking in your chair like this hard-boiled detective, real big thinker piece or anything like that the reviewer seems to want it to be.
But if you've played Mouse PI, you know that there is some serious stuff in the game, and there are also genuinely touching moments. A big part of the story is about how the smaller shrews are constantly oppressed by the bigger mice due to their size. There is rampant corruption in the police force, even with people Jack admired. And Jack himself is a victim of war, and his cynicism is actually justified very tactfully in my opinion, from his experience with the horrors of war.
Funny. I remember it different.
Oh?
Yeah. A lot of smoke, a lot of gas. And that sound. You know the one. Like a drop of water that won't come out of your ear.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh.
And don't get me wrong, the story isn't philosophical, it doesn't dive very deep into these subjects, but it also doesn't treat them as jokes. Humor exists during the dialogue and of course in the animation, but the subject matter itself is not used for humor. Similarly, when it comes to emotions, there are a lot of anchors as well. Jack has a lovely father-daughter relationship with Tammy. It's always nice talking to Wanda the journalist because Jack and her always put up a professional front, but their chemistry is so good that it feels like underneath all the verbal jousting, they are truly friends. Jack's old friends, though not too close with him in the current day, still bring out a lot of humanity under his sarcastic exterior, and we learn a lot about him through them. Charlie, on the other hand, talks about the game like it's just silly and goofy, and there's nothing meant to be taken seriously in the story at all, and I don't think that summation is true. Now, I'm all about love. I don't like spreading needless hate, so I don't want anyone watching to use this video as a conduit to disrespect Critical. I think the only fair thing to do here is to spread false rumors about Charlie talking to minors and harassing his female and or male employees. So anyone with a meaningless life, justice is waiting to be executed. But coming back to Mouse PI, think of the game, or specifically the game's narrative, as a cartoon more like The Simpsons. It's a comedy, but you still care for the characters and are invested in their struggles beyond just a rabbit outsmarts hunter type of premise. That's why we all love looking up Marge on Rule 34. Because we love the characters beyond just laughing at their antics. In fact, a big complaint with The Simpsons is that Homer was turned from this sort of bumbling but ultimately lovable everyman into a complete caricature who's just there to be the butt of the joke. You wouldn't dismiss that complaint by saying, oh, it's just a cartoon. Mouse PI 2 is comical, but it still has a story that it wants to tell, not just present a simple premise for action and comedy to take place. And even though it doesn't dive deep into the heavier subject matter, I personally think that overall the game did a good enough job with the story. And diverging from the IGN review, the references actually bothered me only in the beginning. But they didn't stop bothering me because the game found a perfect balance between serious and humorous, but because I kinda just zoned it out, like, okay, this is how it's going to be, whatever. I'll just focus on the good parts of the writing.
That's Mr. Kurd. Let's act like we weren't raised by shrews. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm in the middle of...
Overall, I agree with Will that the game just keeps reminding you of it being a game, or being not real, too much, and the constant references and fourth wall breaking do feel overbearing at times and prevent the story from absorbing the player as much as it could have. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. I'm sorry, Alicia. That Mouse PI's pull-out game is so strong and mine isn't. I'm sorry that my quote-unquote real daughter has to be raised by a single mother. I guess that was destiny. Our hands are tied.
When I actually have a kid there's a DNA test from that I've seen.
Then we could talk.
If you think that joke was awful, you've actually fallen right for my trap. I only write amazing jokes actually, and this was totally a test. If you didn't fuck with that joke, then it probably took you out of the video, ruined the pacing. But if you laughed at it, or at the very least, tuned it out, then it probably didn't ruin your experience. I think it must be the same for Mouse PI, because if you enjoyed the game's humor, then the story would not be intruded upon by it. Quite coincidentally, there were a ton of moist critical style jokes in the game.
Antique recipe? What's in it? Fresh turd bow or a handful of crap cakes? All right, Sawyer, this is it. The end of the line.
And I'd have gotten away with it too, if it weren't for you, you meddling mouse.
Excelsior! Something.
So maybe he enjoyed all of that, and also got all the references, because he is quite well versed in pop culture. And so all of that was a source of enjoyment for him.
How about a little tune on the world's tiniest violin?
I think I sit somewhere in the middle between Charlie and IGN, albeit closer to the latter, as being bothered but not too much. But going back to the earlier clip, one thing Charlie said, although short, really rubbed my armpits the wrong way.
He does mention the cheese a lot.
He doesn't? Charlie might be taking the cheese of the powdered variety, because in the review, Will talks about the cheese jokes in the segment about jokes ruining the immersion of the game, and then mentions it briefly while summing up his thoughts in the conclusion, and nowhere else. There is not a lot of nibbling on the same slice again and again going on. He doesn't try to shoehorn this point in other sections, so you can just check for yourself. This might seem trivial and is not really about Mouse PI directly, but like with the opening segment, just shows how much Charlie is predisposed to hating IGN.
Stay back, you swine!
He might be off his gourd, as some may say. Okay, I see some of you salutes out there thinking I'm trying to pull a fast one on you, but no need to twirl your whiskers about it. I've not forgotten what Charlie said about the complaints about the logical inconsistencies. But the OG review brings up those issues slowly over the course of the video, so I'll tackle them as we go. One instance is coming right up, but we'll cover it slowly, like a huge block of Parmigiano Reggiano being stirred in a pot of upcoming risotto as you go bald from the little chef's hair pulling and he has to switch to your pubes instead.
And it doesn't end there. A boss fight in the sewers? It's a literal alligator, because of course it is. If you're looking for the cheese-liking foreman, Jack will quip that he doesn't look like much of a boss,
More like a mini-boss.
and then laugh at his own joke.
Just listen to the way he talks about it. He fucking hated this. I think he wanted to go lower than a 6, but then felt like the response would be too ferocious if he did.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I hated it too. I think that joke was really corny, and I guess Charlie disagrees, but I doubt most people would have laughed at it. But the next part about the alligator...
I don't even understand the complaint about the alligator boss fight. Did he have the same complaint for Resident Evil 2 when you fought a sewer gator there? It actually feels like it's doing the IGN meme of too much water, if you remember that one. This one is too much cheese.
Yeah, I have to agree with Charlie. The alligator is a boss in the sewer. Yeah, like, what's the problem? That doesn't impact the story in any shape or form, and gameplay-wise, it's actually one of the better bosses in the game. The too much cheese is a straw man though, as I said. The mini-boss joke is just one in a constant barrage of silly kind of references, and I've already talked about it. Let's take a detour instead, a short one, and talk about something that's been boiling on my mind for a long time. What Charlie just mentioned at the end. Too much water.
Water?
I think most people watching this video must know about this, but for those who don't, Too Much Water is a memeable moment about IGN, where they gave Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, remakes of Ruby and Sapphire, a 7.8 out of 10, with one of the complaints being too much water. And this phrase has been mocked and memed endlessly, and is one of the defining silver bullets against IGN. If you've read Caliplag's review on IGN for the games, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, or watched the video review, then you might have come across that little portion about too much water and came out thinking, well, that's a reasonable complaint. However, if you are a chud who never laid eyes on the review and just saw the meme of IGN saying, too much water, then you might have found it very silly. There's also a third category in which I feel Charlie might fall into, of people who know that the complaint was completely reasonable, but hey, it's it's IGN, so who gives a fuck? And I don't know which of the two is worse. Oh, I haven't actually explained the too much water complaint though. If you haven't checked out the review, please do. But here is the awful out of touch take Callie had about the water.
It's not a new complaint, but the Hoenn region is still imbalanced type-wise, heavily favoring water Pokemon. It's especially noticeable in Alpha Sapphire since the villainous Team Aqua uses a lot of water types. It just feels like there are water Pokemon in nearly every battle, and I have an overleveled Pikachu to show for it. You also have to navigate many bodies of water, which makes much of the late game incredibly tedious. The water is absolutely gorgeous with the new graphics and details though. One of my favorite parts of the entire adventure was splashing through puddles that reflected the starry skies at night.
I think that's as understandable as getting indigestion from too many cheesy references. Maybe you don't relate, maybe fighting water-type Pokemon again and again didn't bother you, and maybe diving wasn't tedious. But you don't have to be on the same page with her. You can still see where she's coming from, or at the very least not pretend that her argument was literally there just being lots of bodies of water in the games. I haven't played the remakes, but in the originals, I do remember getting tired of the water. Tentacools in those games were for me what Zubats were in the previous games, 100%. Zubats were worse, but kinda close. And the other complaint about too many HMs is also completely understandable.
My least favorite part of every Pokemon game is the unnecessary inclusion of too many hidden moves, commonly referred to as HMs, which are required to traverse the region. They feel very forced and dated. X and Y only has 5 HMs, so you didn't feel like you had to load down your team with unnecessary moves.
I want to teach my Pokemon awesome moves for fighting, and having too many weak moves permanently take up slots for just exploration feels more like hemorrhoids than Metroid. This wasn't that big of a deal for me, but I played the originals. Remember that she's reviewing the remakes, and the complaint was that the remakes had the opportunity to clean up a lot of things, and some things they did, but other things they didn't.
Really, all the tweaks to the original Hoenn features are improvements. Unfortunately, there are still a few big flaws that weren't addressed, and they're even more noticeable in light of more recent Pokemon RPGs.
So the OGs could get a 9 out of 10. They improved a lot from previous games, brought something fresh to the series, but a remake can't get that same leniency. Not to mention that 7.8 isn't even a bad score, but well, who cares about context when the bandwagon seats are so warm and comfy? Look, I'm not saying don't criticize IGN. I'm not even saying do it politely. Yeah, make memes, crack jokes, all of that. I wasn't born yesterday. I know how pandering, blacklisting, whitelisting, everything works. But if something or someone is bad, you will get to criticize them when they fuck up. But there's no need to fight with shadows where there's just a normal gaming employee writing something completely reasonable, just trying to do their job. But enough detour, let's get back to the actual case.
Even here, though, I have issues. Weapons can feel weak, especially the shotgun. It's got the audio kick of a pop gun, and there's a strange disconnect to seeing something that sounds like a kid's toy blow off some poor mouse's head as you paint the white of the world with black ichor that spews from his neck.
I honestly have no idea what this complaint means. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, me neither, Charlie. See, IGN doesn't have me on a leash. No one has me on a leash. That photo was clearly AI, Mom! I completely disagree with the point that whatever Will's trying to say.
He was going on to compliment the gameplay. It's a boomer shooter. It's a very competent one at that. It's a fun one, which he was also mentioning, but then said like he also has complaints here, and then notes the shotgun sounding like a kid's toy and then blowing off bad guys' heads in the game. It's a cartoon, man. What? Like, it sounds like a cartoon shotgun from fucking some kind of WB cartoon back in the day. Like, what do you like? What is it supposed to sound like?
Like Charlie said, it's a cartoon, but going even further, it's not like the sounds are This doesn't sound unimmersive to me at all. And moreover, the head exploding and black ink spewing, and in fact all the death animations in the game are also cartoonish. So I don't know why, even if the gunshots did sound silly, how they contrast poorly against the death animations, which are also silly. Willy, Sense is calling and it's saying, "Common, you can do better." Maybe he was disappointed with the sound design aspect a bit more generally, as in the sounds are just not good or high quality. But I don't really see it, or hear it I should say. I think the sound design and music were actually spot on in the game. No gun bothered me, and beyond them, there were a lot of memorable SFX like the anvils falling, enemies turning into skeletons from acid, the little ding that plays before and after a fight is over, the big grunts of the enemies. Oh wait, that was something in the background. Never should have let my cat touch my keyboard. But the weapon SFX weren't the best out of all the sound effects, but they were still good. In moi's humble opinion. The soundtrack of the game was also very good, and anyone who plays the game will surely be able to hum the main theme. But unfortunately, I'ma have to get back on Charlie's ass again for this next portion.
Enemies mostly come out of doors marked with a skull that you can't enter, robbing these areas of anything remotely resembling a sense of place. Levels also really like to pull the "we're gonna lock you in a room and throw baddies at you until they're dead or you are" shtick a little too much for my taste. None of this is game-breaking. The combat is fundamentally good enough to carry you to the end of the roughly 12-hour campaign, but sometimes it feels like being at a show that's never quite bad enough to leave.
Here's another complaint that I think is truly pulled out of his ass just for the sake of trying to find anything else to be negative about to justify a 6. What do you mean that there were too many rooms of just killing enemies to progress? It's a boomer shooter. You know it's a boomer shooter. You have even made a mention of that. That is the core gameplay loop of a boomer shooter. You go into a corridor and you fucking blast ass until there's no one left and then you move forward. Did he have the same complaint for Doom?
Yes, of course. Why try to switch things up and innovate? Why not keep doing the same shit again and again? You'll get support from brainwashed bandwagoners anyway, so what's the point of trying to do something interesting? Okay, Charlie, now we're kinda stretching it, like cheese pulling 2 halves of an ungrilled cheese sandwich. It's not the right thing to do, brother. There's nothing there. Will didn't speak nonsense. Just because a genre is built a certain way doesn't mean we should expect or be okay with lots and lots and lots of repetition. You can still do spicy things with the level design in a boomer shooter, like, let's use the example of, there's a new game called Mouse PI for Hire on the cheese block. Let's take a look at that, one of the last sections of the game. Here you have to keep your footing on a small plane while mowing down enemy planes, and then you jump from plane to plane, clearing enemies as you go. Usually, if you fall, you just respawn at the edge of your ledge, but here, it's game over and then a start over. So the flight is challenging and also really fun, and also not in a room filled with waves of enemies, and also the genre is still boomer shooter, and also Charlie is becoming a boomer, so maybe he's getting stuck in his ways. And even if most of the fights in Mouse PI couldn't have this type of spectacle for story and technical reasons, some simple gimmicks could have been used to spice things up, like crumbling platforms above an abyss, slippery floors, wind pressure, portals, things that are not new. All of these are common tropes seen in all types of action games, and Mouse PI has its own few switch-ups, but they are few and far between. However, even with the way things are, there are 2 ways in which this absence could have felt less boring. One of them is just the gameplay loop being better, so let's talk about that. Charlie does comment on Will's opinion of the gameplay, but I don't think he presents a proper picture.
If the complaint was the gameplay's not good enough to make me excited for each of these rooms, that would be understandable. But he made a strong mention that the gameplay is good, and is very fun enough to carry you through it. So, I just don't understand how anyone could have an issue of rooms of enemies you have to kill to move forward in a boomer shooter when that is the entire, meat of that genre.
I don't know, Charlie. I love you. I dream of talking to you because I don't have any friends. But I don't think Will said that. A key thing to note from this particular segment of IGN is this part.
The combat is fundamentally good enough to carry you to the end of the roughly 12-hour campaign, but sometimes it feels like being at a show that's never quite bad enough to leave.
He's clearly saying that the gameplay is good enough at fundamentals, but it gets repetitive because of the encounter design. So, I don't know. I think most people would just infer from that the gameplay isn't good enough to overcome the repetitive encounter design. I guess Will could have maybe worded it a bit better, but I also think another reviewer, not from IGN or any mainstream publications, could have worded it the same way, and people would be naturally more charitable towards them. But when it comes to IGN, everyone is just waiting with bated breath and puckered ass for them to say something stupid, so they can rain down a shitstorm all over the parade. Most of IGN comments are basically, haha, so stupid, what would you expect from IGN? Or I was gonna say a good IGN review, how refreshing, as if they were waiting for IGN to give a bad review. But I was checking some reviews to get screenshots, and there was definitely a lot less hate than I remembered. There were the occasional jabs, and maybe I had seen comments like these before and internalized that they were the majority, forgetting that most people are actually normal. But a lot of people already seem to get the point that I was going to make, that those are still individuals who write the reviews, and they'll have different tastes and opinions. It is true that hate sells, and I did get a bit manipulated, thinking that everyone bashed on IGN, when most people, yes, even gamers, are normal, reasonable humans. There is definitely a market for that hate though, don't get me wrong. All I want to say is, IGN reviews almost every single new game, and because of that, there's bound to be duds, scores and reasonings that everyone disagrees with. But yeah, you don't have to just overlook it. A dud is a dud. If a review seems ridiculous, sure, call it out. But make sure that the dud is actually a dud, please. Looked at with a fair lens, the constant enemies in locked rooms complaint makes total sense. It would not be a problem if the gameplay could carry it, like in Doom, a game that Charlie mentions, but mouse PI just isn't that good. Will doesn't dive deep into that deficient burrata called gameplay, but I will, because I really wanted to like mouse PI. I did, like Diddy did the kiddies, but by the end, the formula felt like it was spread too thin, like a single spoon of cream cheese on a Latina's BBL. Mouse PI is a short game, but it's not a king game. Even with its shortness, it feels like the game overstays its welcome. There's some variety in the enemies, but it's like getting different meals every day of the week at your college hostel. Every day the meal changes, but every week the meal plan stays the same for like 3 years. There are different enemy types, but they are the same different enemy types we've seen in games for like even more than 3 years now. That's enough time to waste your life and then try doing YouTube. Well, you've got your small enemies, bigger brutes, medium-sized brutes, shielded enemies, flying enemies, etc. The one interesting gimmick is with the sniper, who can teleport to another location if you get too close. Oh wait, there is one completely unique enemy, I think. It throws electric balls in a weird pattern and also looks weird, but I only encountered it 2 or 3 times in the entire game, around the end. Therefore, I'm not sure how it works exactly. And unlike Doom, you don't have unique interactions with enemies through executions and unique drops, so Mouse PI's gameplay loop is not the most interesting. But it's not the worst thing either. The enemy placements are good, and it's fun trying not to get swarmed, while also having interactable objects like barrels with different effects and droppable stuff. The latter is really deadly and satisfying. It's awesome to get the drop on a huge group since it can one-shot any enemy, and even you, so be careful. Whoa, what the feta? I can see why every NPC is always pointed right at us. Oh, God, is this what women have to deal with? The horror. It makes me so mad. Yeah, I did go through a breakup recently and I'm ready to mingle, why do you ask? But anyway, good enemy placement and interactive objects is good, but for as long as the game went on, there needed to be some more switch-ups in either enemy variety or level gimmicks for the game to still feel fresh. Because the weapons do not fill that hole. On my soul, the unique ones you get in the later parts of the game are just useless. You get Jarhead, a stun gun, which is just the worst version of the Devarnisher, which you get much earlier. Because Jarhead stuns the enemy for a really short time and does really low damage per hit, whereas the Devarnisher stuns the enemy also for a really short time, but while doing damage over time. So you can shoot certain enemies and then set your focus on others while the Devarnished ones burn to death in the background. With a silly animation. What a callback, huh? Remember the time I sided with Charlie? Remember that if at any point you're about to type some shit, then The Jarhead's alternate attack is better since you can headshot with it, but it feels gimmicky. It's the same as using a Tommy gun, except you don't have the punch of recoil, and it also drains ammo really fast. For the unique benefit of head exploding animation, which you won't have much time to admire in the heat of battle anyway. At least you can kill enemies quickly with it though. The portable freezer's primary fire also has a ray attack. But freezing takes longer than exploding heads since there's no headshotting, and you can't kill the frozen enemies with the portable freezer itself, making you melee attack them or change your gun, leading to too much time spent focusing on single enemies in a game where you need to be constantly moving, so it just doesn't feel as good to use as a normal gun. With the freezing barrels, the whole point is that you can lock the enemies instantly and kill them in one hit after freezing, but the freezer doesn't provide that type of satisfaction. I think both of these weapons would be better as grenades set to an alternate key, which has never been heard of before. The dynamite is just your normal blast, the brain jar would be a stun grenade, and the freezer a freezing grenade. As guns, these just don't feel good to use. The shotgun, Tommy gun, and the varnisher are the only guns you'll really need and also feel the best to use. The saw might be good, but I didn't realize that it was a ranged weapon for most of the game, saw my health getting shredded like, cheese, and didn't use it. Thinking, damn, these guys didn't watch Full Metal Alchemist. If you take away range, you have to give something, like big damage or knockback. Law of equivalent exchange, you know? Want your mom back? Give up your bodies. Wait. That wasn't their mom. They say so later, so they weren't related. So, if I was Edward, if we were Edward, we would... I'm getting sidetracked. I wish I could keep getting sidetracked because there's another nail in the we were out of ideas coffin that I want to mention. This pains me to say, but the final ability the game gives you is... Let's climb. Put the blue cheese in the wee baguette, little bro. You're not fooling anyone. I know someone on the team had the talent, and dare I say genius, to place these platforms a little lower when designing the level. If the game had using new abilities to go back to old places and unlock new areas, then it wouldn't have stuck out. But as it is, it gives massive, we just had to have had something here, so we came up with whatever vibes. The power-ups are also pretty uninspired. You have burn damage, super strength, and finger guns, which are fine, rather have them than not. But again, they're fun references, but nothing that I can really talk with enthusiasm about. And say that, oh well, you think mouse PI is monotonous? Take this, you mono brain cells. Stupid. Phew, will never be equal. Sorry, I got carried away with my fake feelings. Another way to solve, or at least lessen the problem of too many locked rooms with enemies pouring in, would be a great story. And Mouse PI's story, like I said before, has good stuff in it. But like Will mentions in the review, is brought down by too many self-referential jokes and references. It's good enough to get you till the end, but not something that elevates the game. Indeed, the biggest gripe with Mouse PI that I have is that there's nothing special to recommend about it besides the presentation, and that can only carry the experience so far. If I were to tell someone else to try it, all I could do is describe it, that it's a boomer shooter, that it is a noir-style game, but there's nothing besides the art style and maybe the music that I could point to and say this is something that makes this game special, a reason to try it over other games.
Some of these locks are on a time limit, or must be solved in a limited number of moves, and you only get one shot at the good stuff they hold. Others are so easy you could probably solve them by letting an actual mouse run across your keyboard. It's very jarring.
Why is that very jarring? You got me porky pigging right now. In Skyrim, there's novice lockpicks, and then there's expert lockpicks. Is it jarring there too? It's called different levels of difficulty with the lockpicks. Like, what do you mean? Yes, there's going to be easy ones, and then there's going to be more difficult ones with strict things like certain number of moves, or you're only allocated a certain number of moves or a certain amount of time. It's a scale. There's easy and then there's hard. Why is that jarring? That's like the most established thing in all of gaming.
Oh God. Another what the fuck are you talking about has hit the Moist Critical headquarters. Charlie, it's very jarring because I feel so stupid even saying it. I'll just play the IGN review part again.
Some of these locks are on a time limit, or must be solved in a limited number of moves, and you only get one shot at the good stuff they hold. Others are so easy you could probably solve them by letting an actual mouse run across your keyboard.
How is that not jarring? Charlie says that the difficulty is a scale, and sure, maybe he thinks that it is, but then say that you disagree, that there are just super easy and super hard lockpicks, and that actually there's a difficulty curve with them. And look at yourself in the mirror and you'll see a better person. That would have been reasonable. But Charlie acts like the review was taking an issue with different levels of difficulty when no. Will points out that there's no middle ground in the difficulty, which is true. It's actually not super hard and super easy lockpicks like I mentioned earlier. It's hard-ish lockpicks and super duper brain dead easy 100-year-old Alzheimer's patient of the year grandpa could do it level of difficulty lockpicks. The hard ones are, like the review says, made annoying by the fact that you only get one shot at them, but you can just load a previous save. And the game saves frequently, so it's not that big a deal. The big deal again is there not being much middle ground in the difficulty. But this big deal is also not that big a deal considering the game is an FPS, but it is actually a big deal in this instance because you can see Charlie clearly misrepresenting what Will said in his review. Again, it's completely fine to argue that no, there is middle ground, but Will doesn't have a problem with there simply being a difficulty scale like Charlie seems to think.
Now he goes on to compliment multiple other things about the game, but then says that he never got to do the whole detective thing because the game does it for you, and that's another thing that he had an issue with. And that's another thing I think is totally understandable to be like, I'm a little disappointed because the game doesn't make you solve anything. It does do it for you. You gather the clues, you put them on the board, and it connects the dots, solves it, and then you just do the mission. But I think that's totally fine.
Right, that's a valid criticism. Nothing else to say for that portion, but Charlie was being agreeable here, so I thought I should keep that so it doesn't seem like I'm trying to show him being just mind-boggled throughout the video.
But I think that's totally fine. The game is a boomer shooter. It is not really a detective game. It is a noir aesthetic, a love letter to noir. It is not putting you as like a detective needing to do like an LA Noire style investigation to figure things out. It is a boomer shooter at its core, so it doesn't bother me, but I think maybe he's not alone. Maybe some other people also wanted to have more like detective elements to it, so that's okay to be a little let down there. I think that's somewhat reasonable. I don't think that's a huge, weird complaint to have there.
Here overall, I do side with Charlie. I can see his point, but my eyes are squinting just a little bit. I think it again comes down to how good the gameplay loop is. Yes, the game is a boomer shooter, agreed, hands shaken, tips touched, but like I said before, I think it's good but not amazing. And if you also felt that it was not amazing, then firstly, you are objectively and morally right and your seat in heaven is confirmed, but also something extra, like a detective system, could have helped elevate the game. It would be pretty difficult to integrate clues that you actually need to search for and can miss and have different outcomes and endings based on that into the game, but taking a page from LA Noire, Mouse PI could just give you a bad score as a stick in your ass for a mission if you didn't do your detective work well, and not have the greater story impacted. But I won't harp on this too much because I've already talked about how decent gameplay can still make a great game if there's other good stuff earlier, so let's get to the next segment.
That brings me to one of my major problems with Mouse PI for Hire. Look, I hate to be that guy who brings up ludonarrative dissonance in a video game review in the year of our Lord 2026, and if you're rolling your eyes right now, I can't blame you, but it's an actual issue here. Jack Pepper is a PI who kills more people in a single mission than Philip Marlowe has in every book Raymond Chandler ever wrote combined. I don't care how corrupt the cops are. A private detective can't break into a police station and slaughter them en masse and then go about his day.
It's actually not a problem here at all, because it's a cartoon. This is supposed to be a cartoon, and one that doesn't take itself seriously, very obviously doesn't take itself seriously, because everything that happens in there is used as a joke or a means of, like, entertaining you as a cartoon would. You, the detective Jack, going around massacring 1,000 bad guys and then cooling off at John's with a tall fucking glass of fondue and then playing cards at the table is totally understandable in this setting because it's a cartoon.
Oh god. We have to talk about ludonarrative dissonance now, huh? It's probably what all the fake gamers who want games to be recognized as art but aren't ready to discuss games as art are probably thinking. But I love ludonarrative dissonance. The concept, not the feeling of dissonance. And I have to say, I don't think Mouse PI's narrative is dissonant with the, Ludo. It is kind of dicey, because I don't share Charlie's enthusiasm or shock against IGN's claim here.
It's such a weird complaint. Like, I really think this is just so odd.
Because sometimes things do feel weird. I know it's a cartoon and I'm not gonna be too vehement against Charlie either because of that, but I don't know. Sometimes you kill a whole bunch of mice and shrews and rats and then enter a building and blend right in. No commotion, no stranger danger, no women fawning over your psychopathic tendencies. I guess I still gotta side with Moist because I did get over it because the game is a cartoon, but I still can see where Will is coming from. But definitely, I don't think that's ludonarrative dissonance, and I was actually gonna have a whole segment over the topic here, but I had so much to say that my script got kinda out of hand, and I was veering really far from mouse PI. So I'll probably save that bigger discussion for another video, and point out one very basic condition for ludonarrative dissonance to occur, which doesn't happen in mouse PI. So LD is not so simple as in the story you're a relatively normal guy, but in gameplay, oh shit, you murder hordes of people like it's Sunday in Afghanistan. No, first the game has to make a certain type of ludic contract, as Clint Hawking puts it. If you haven't read his ludonarrative dissonance in Bioshock, the link will be in the description, it's where the term came from. But anyway, in a game's ludic contract, which in overly simple terms means the game's proposition about what the gameplay will involve, it can suggest to the player that the themes of the game are going to be experienceable through the gameplay. In Bioshock, that was the choice between saving the innocent little sisters or harvesting them for Adam, which could be used to gain new abilities and upgrade existing ones. This allowed you to participate in the game's themes of objectivism through gameplay. You could be an objectivist by pursuing individual gain as the greater good, or you could reject that philosophy by saving those you could. But if there is no engagement between gameplay and narrative on a deep level, there is no premise for ludonarrative dissonance to occur in the first place. There's other stuff I could get into, but at this very first step of connecting gameplay to the greater narrative, Mouse PI, I don't want to say fails, because it's not necessarily bad to keep your gameplay separate from the narrative themes, but Mouse PI just isn't that type of game. The gameplay and story are separate, and some of the enemy placements right next to the innocent bystanders did irk me, but I have to disagree that the degree of violence in any way detracts from the story. In action movies, the protagonists often kill plenty of people, but if the theme of the movie is not the morality and burden of killing, then the question doesn't really pop up in the viewers' minds that why are these people still sane, and why isn't the whole city in a panic, etc, etc. Similarly, we are familiar with the genre of FPSs and all sorts of action games in gaming, that it involves killing a lot of bad guys and sometimes maybe even good guys. So we naturally push it aside as gameplay necessity unless, in the Hawkingsian way, the game's ludic contract brings attention to the killing. That killing is what the game is about. And to top it off, Mouse PI, like Charlie mentions, is a cartoon, so it should be even easier to suspend disbelief here. So like I said, I see where Will is coming from, but I think he came on his own. I don't think that the game is at fault at all. It sets expectations very well, and there's certainly no ludonarrative dissonance happening.
The reason why this review is getting dunked on by a lot of people, and now I'm yapping about it so much, is because the reason that he's giving for it being a 6 is solely because it seems he just really wanted to be a serious noir, and the fact that it's silly and plays by cartoon rules instead of noir rules bothered him so much that it knocks it all the way to a 6 despite everything else being good, like all of the actual gameplay which he makes a mention of.
Okay, I just don't understand where Charlie's getting this idea that Will really likes the gameplay but Mouse PI just doesn't live up to his standards of a noir thriller, so he gave it a low score. Will has constantly talked about the gameplay as being good enough. It's alright.
This is the latest in a wave of boomer shooters inspired by old school FPSs like Doom or Quake, and it's a decent one at that. This ain't Quake, but it does feel good. Combat is fundamentally good enough to carry you to the end of the roughly 12-hour campaign, but sometimes it feels like being at a show that's never quite bad enough to leave. And at least on the normal difficulty, health items are so generous there's rarely a challenge.
To me, it sounds like Will thinks the combat is slightly above average, but nothing to write home about. And he doesn't. So I can't get behind how Charlie's putting it. Like, Will thinks highly of the gameplay, but that the silliness brought it down by like 3 whole points or something. Don't mean to repeat myself too much. Some people repeatedly suck Charlie's dick, some repeat points like me, we're all kind of similar. When going off the actual review, it seems Will found the gameplay to be fine, like maybe a 7 based on how he talks about it. But with how much the story bothered him, it couldn't carry the weight of the entire experience. I also feel that Charlie is contradicting himself with something he said just moments before this.
Again, the score isn't even that bothersome to me, because I'm sure people have played this and they're like, it's not really for me. The writing, doesn't make me laugh, and I don't love the shooting, and, it's the same enemies are repeated tons of times. It's not like there's a ton of enemy variety, and it doesn't really challenge you to be switching weapons constantly like other boomer shooters, so, maybe I'd give it a 6. I could understand that, and I'm sure there are people that have that take. That's not the issue.
When some metaphorical player says that they didn't like the writing, that there's not much enemy variety, that the game is not challenging, it's completely understandable. But when Will GN says that it's just lock rooms with enemies again and again, then what the fuck? That's just the genre, what the fuck? When he says the polar difficulties with tail picking is jarring, then whoa? have you never heard of difficulty before? When he says that the game was too easy on normal, well, that didn't even register. In fact, none of these complaints seem to be taken into account when analyzing Will's final score. No, he actually thought highly of everything, but ooh, just because of his desire for the game to be serious, for that sole reason, the score was brought down, way down, to a 6. And with the writing itself, yeah, I agree with Charlie, like I said, that the game is just a cartoon. I can even see Will's bias because he mentions killing an opera lady who is actually a thug in disguise and he didn't notice it.
Jack inadvertently burns down an opera house to save a guy running for mayor, and he ends up fighting an opera singer and shoots her? Is she dead? Did I just kill an actress for being angry I burned down her workplace?
Like I said before, I watch a ton of dark psychology dank edits, so in my expert opinion, hell, in my basically licensed opinion, the jokes and tone of the game were probably already bothering Will, and his mind must have marked the opera boss fight as another flag of silliness, messing with the internal cohesion of the game, which is obviously wrong. Like I said, I agree with Charlie about Will's feeling of dissonance being his own fault and not the game's. But even in that, Charlie said that he can understand why the barrage of silly references bothered Will.
He doesn't like that it's constantly referencing the fact that they're mice, or that it's a video game, or other cartoons, thinks it's too referential, which I actually think is a valid complaint. He doesn't like the writing. You can boil it down to the writing wasn't tickling him. It didn't make him giggle, and he started to roll his eyes at how many times they mentioned cheese. I actually think that's totally fine.
That the game's humor won't be everyone's cup of tea. So he could at least add that as something non-bullshit that affected the score and not just some soul flabbergasting the game is not the kind of noir I want, wah wah. But that's just me being charitable, which I know isn't really considered right to do towards heathens like an ordinary game journalist. But anyway, I'm gonna skip over some stuff where I just agree with both Charlie and the IGN review, see where both of them are coming from because I'm a huge empath. And also obviously I have an agenda to smear Charlie and get some clout off of him, so it just makes sense to cover parts where I can bash him. So let's move forward to this abysmal take by Charlie.
But Will, you might say, this is a goofy Looney Tunes FPS. Why should I care about any of that? And the answer is because Mouse wants you to. It wants you to believe that this is important. You spend a lot of time talking about these characters, about putting together the clues you need to get to the bottom of what's going on, about Jack's motivation for doing the work. He allegedly needs the money, which both leads him to taking cases and doesn't track when I'm super rich from all the killing.
Oh my god, it's like it's the first video game he's ever played. He is now using the fact that you collect currency when you kill the bad guys as a way of saying, now the story doesn't make sense because I'm no longer down on my luck. I got so much money, I'm rich, look at my inventory. Brother, what? And he's dreadfully misunderstood the game if he thinks that it's taking itself seriously. At no point throughout the 10 hours I've spent with it so far have I even had a whiff, the slightest huff of something that's supposed to be taken seriously as like an emotional beat. Because at every step of the way, even during like a big reveal and like a big betrayal of someone that we looked up to, it is used as slapstick comedy when you actually get there and confront them. It is always being silly, because that's what cartoons do.
Well, you sure you don't have any friends you'd rather take instead of little old me?
It's a family kind of thing. And, well, you're the closest thing I got to a dad, so...
Mind taking a picture of us, mister? Just got married, see? I didn't have the money for a wedding, and, well, you know, work.
We've both seen war, Corny. Or did that slip your mind? We were the tools. Maybe he changed. Maybe he finally grew a conscience. Or maybe I'm a fool, growing yet another soft spot. Maybe.
Charlie does mention that he only played for 10 hours before making the video, but I don't believe he changed his opinion on Will's perspective after finishing the game. If I missed something, then do let me know. However, he could have waited to make this video after getting the full experience. And also, the game brings up the shrew and mouse disparity and Jack's troubled past early on, so I don't get why it was hard for Charles to see Will's point. But maybe I'm just paid by IGN. Yeah, I'm such a shill. I deserve to be harassed with feet pics in my DMs. I hate feet so much. As for the point about having too much money, I do think having a bad economy is a bad thing, but I don't think it tampers with the immersion too much, because money is not ever made a concern narratively, as Will kind of puts it. But Charlie's health is my concern, because what he says next will blow your mind. Bottom 10 Charlie moments of all time.
And like he mentions, it tries to get you invested because you spend a lot of time with them. Yeah, man. That's because that's called a good game that has a lot to do. You get to interact with the characters, you get to talk to them, you get to learn about them, and that's fun. And it's always entertaining camaraderie between them. But that doesn't mean that it needs to be taken to the utmost level of seriousness, like in the noir properties that you're referencing, because that's not what it goes for. And I don't know how he could possibly get that impression when he was playing it. I really don't know. I don't get it.
Call me Charles the Misunderstander the way I don't get it. I don't get how Charlie doesn't get it. Will isn't making a comparison to other noir films here. He's talking about how Mouse PI itself wants us to care about the story but undercuts that story due to 1. The fourth wall humor, which I agree with, and 2. The immersion breaking gameplay, which I don't agree with. Charlie's response to this is that the getting to know other characters is fun and entertaining, but it doesn't need to be taken to the extreme heights of seriousness, and it doesn't. But we're not asking it to match other noirs in seriousness. We, you and me and all of us, are talking about taking the story as seriously as it is presented to us. Again, I completely disagree with Charlie's statement that
it is always being silly, because that's what cartoons do.
From that description, someone who hasn't played the game would certainly take Mouse PI to be like Roadrunner, Bugs Bunny, Tweety, etc. Where, like I said before, the story is limited to being a premise for slapstick comedy to take place. And that's just not true of Mouse PI. It does have a story to tell. It does have characters that it wants you to care about more than just as devices that take you from one set piece to the next. And it does bring that down with the constant, this is just a piece of fiction, self-aware humor. And yes, you can get over it like I did, or maybe even enjoy it like Charlie did. But I just don't get how you can't see where Will is coming from. How you can pretend that what Will sees in the story is simply reaching, that it's all supposed to be slapstick comedy.
Mouse PI for Hire nails the aesthetics of both the 1930s cartoons and the detective stories that inspired it. And it's also an amusing boomer shooter that largely feels good as you're playing it. But its haphazard marriage of noir storytelling tropes and shooter gameplay are often at odds with each other in uncomfortable ways that weaken both aspects. And the writing is so busy making references to other things that it's actually painful to sit through at times. This FPS is solid enough if you just want to blast some cartoon mice and not think about it too hard. But once you do, all you'll see are the seams where disparate ideas have been fused together, and no trench coat can hide the stink of that moldy cheese.
I know I just put Penguin Z0 in a coffin to joke about how wrong he is, but here again I would disagree with IGN. I don't think the gameplay and narrative mesh poorly with each other, they're just poor individually. Not you deserve to die poor, but not that good poor. That sums up my opinion of Mouse PI. A fun game, but not one that I'll keep coming back to or use as an example of why gaming is awesome. And that's fine. Just as I don't like people being dumbfounded when someone doesn't like a game as much as they do, I also don't like when gamers can't give a decent experience any leniency. I'm not here to discourage anyone from playing Mouse PI. My intention was to show that Will's review wasn't really as absurd as people would have you believe. And with that, my overall conclusion is that 6 out of 10 for Mouse PI is fair enough. And I disagree with some points Will makes, but it's not the end of the world for me. Nor the birth of a new world where IGN always sucks and I can gleefully make fun of their reviews all the time. There's a bit more footage in Charlie's video, but it's just him going over everything he already covered briefly, so I'll just leave it to you if you want to go check out that OG video fully. One thing that does interest me is, again, this kind of flabbergasted tone of what is the reviewer even yapping about?
This review was just wild. I had to talk about it a bit more. I was talking about it a bit last night on stream when I was going through the IGN review before playing some more Mouse PI for Hire. And it was something, man. It really was. So anyway.
Let me know if you felt that way when and if you watched the IGN review. For me, the ludonarrative dissonance part was overreaching. I don't think being an FPS hinders the story because, like I said, with the Ludic contract, we know from the get-go that it is a game with detective story, not detective gameplay. But even with disagreements, I can still take away stuff from Will's review. His love of noir does offer an interesting perspective, like how certain gameplay genres might fit better or worse with certain types of stories. And I wish I could say the same for Charlie's video because I agree with him on some stuff about the IGN review, but the video just stinks of desperate misunderstanding and a big bias against IGN. Honestly though, seeing all the comments that agree, it is kinda sad how much hate sells. I hope it's not a symptom of people being unhappy in their personal lives. Hopefully it's not that deep. And yeah, I tried to keep the tone as light as possible. Obviously I made some jokes about Charlie, but I feel I was very fair and lighthearted. Of course I want the video to do well, but if it does, I wonder what type of comments I'll get. probably lovely ones because all of my subscribers have always been level-headed and chill, so any newcomers will also be wonderful. But whether you're new or old, I appreciate you tremendously if you made it till the end. A special thank you to all my Patreon supporters. You'll see their names scrolling by on the screen right now. Titus Uno. May every mouse you come across in life be as kind as Jack Pepper. If you liked the video, consider joining this huge family for just $1 a month, or just liking, subscribing, etc. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Better watch it. Getting hammered in hell sounds like a